Welcome back to our second installment on C# programming, and this video we will be diving more into the topic of static in C# and continue doing the functionality of our student database application. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. We will be working on the same previous project from the last time, where we do have a student class that does have three properties, where my constructor is accepting a name and email, and then we will be setting the ID by using the magic of static variable. If you did not watch our previous video, I encourage you to do so. My UI now is just having three students and three buttons. We have a data here for a student and a 3-click handler for each button. Remind you of the look of our application. Okay, let's run the application and wait for it. Now we have, Okay, this is my application where it does have a title, 3 buttons, and we have the click handler for each button here. Okay, perfect. Now, what we aim for is to have a list of students where we could add a new student to this list, where we could search a student by their ID using this list, and then print this list to my UI. Having the data and the click handler in the same file, it's not considered to be a separation of concern, which means the data always needed to be in a separate file than my UI logic. Always remember that the data, whenever you need a list of something, a list of data, wherever you need to go ahead and create a new class, call it my object that's going to have in the list where our student repository, where we could know that this class will be having a list of data. Okay, so the list gonna be list of students, students, and we will be initialize it to be empty for now. Now we have a list of students here where I could easily use this list and add some student to it. Okay, we have a student here. I need in my MAUI C#, I need to have access to this class, so I will have access to this list in this function, in this function, and in this function. So I will be, let me comment this out. I will be creating a student repository object here is equal new student repository. Okay, now we have this object where I could easily use it in my add student and then add new data. What I need here, I need a student data. I need to access the list and then add to the list. Okay, it's straightforward. Add to the list. Need the student data? Oh, okay, here you go. This is the first student data. Okay, access the list. How we access the list? The list, it's inside my student repository class. Here you go. Dot students. This is the list, and then we will be adding, let me put this one here as well. Let me adding to my list as student 1. Okay, it's very easy, straightforward. I don't really need anything else here. I've access to the my student repository, to the list, and then I add a new student to my list. Okay, perfect. Now, if I aim, the thing that we need to remember about this student list is it's related to this specific object. But what I'm looking for is to have a class data, a data class that does not have any object. Okay? We will be considered as a database, a class as a database. I don't need to create a multiple copy of this object. I don't need to create a multiple copy of this list. So what I will be doing is creating this class as a static. Okay? I need to create this class as a static class, which means I will not create an object of this class. Okay? Look, my Maui C# is now complaining, because if you make a class as static, you do not have the ability to create any object. Okay? Which what I'm looking for, because like this is the database. I don't want to open a couple of database that does have a couple of lists of the student. I don't want this to happen in my application. I only need one class that's responsible for one list of the student. That's why we make my student repository is static class. So a static mean here I will not be able to access to create any object of this one. That's why the constructor was complaining here for me. Look, it's complaining. Let's read what's giving me. Look, static classes cannot have instance constructor. Why? Because I cannot create an object. And we say the constructor will be called anytime we create an object. So we don't need a constructor anymore. This is the first rule. If you have a static class, means I cannot create any instance of this class, as well as the second structure is, the second rule for the static is anything inside my class, my static class needed to be static as well. Let's think about it. Why it's needed to be static? If we make it static means only the class will have access to this student. If it is not, example, if C# allowing me to make this and my list is not static, means this one is related to an object, but the static class does not have really any object. How gonna access? How I'm gonna access this list? So it does not really make any sense. So I need my class, my static class, to access to these ones, where it should be everything here needed to be a static. Now, no more object. I don't need more object. I could easily just student repository dot student. Now I could access my list through the class name and then dot add as one. Okay? Student repository dot students dot add as one. Okay? The good thing to do here for the student repository class is to make this one not public for sure, private, and then we could for example returning my list, a function that's add to the list, a function that search through this list. Okay, so any function that is related to this specific list, to this specific data, needed to be added here. And then we could easily call these methods inside there. Return a list. First of all, let's think about it. Do you plan to have a list, an empty list from the beginning? Or would you have to have an initialized value for this list? It's up to you, it's your choice. In our example, I will be having an initialized value for my list. I don't want my list to be empty, so I need to initialize my list here. Public initialize list. Okay. For sure, I need to specify the return type. Oh, okay. Another thing, a static class needed everything to be a static as well. Now, initialize a list. Let's grab the data that we already have here. And then put it here. Then add it to my list. Student.add S1 and then student S2 and S3. Okay, we have 3 students now in my list. I've initialized the list. Now let's return the list. How, if this private, how other classes will be accessing this list is by this function, public. I will be returning a list of student, and then let's call it get students. Okay, now I will be initializing the list and then returning this list. Initialize the list and then return this private static here for me. Return students. Okay. Okay, another time. Look, my class is static, means enable, in case to access, to give me an access to this method, I need to make it static. Otherwise, I will not be able to access this method. Okay, add to the list. What's gonna be public void and then add student, as well as, don't forget, static void add student. I need, give me the student data that you are looking for to be added, and then easily access the list student dot add the student that the user just gave me. Okay, for search the list, public, I need, whenever what I'm looking for this functionality is, I will enter an ID, and then you need to give me the student object that does match this ID. So I will be returning static. I will be returning a student that does have this specific ID. We'll call it get student by ID. And give me the ID with, what is it? It's integer. Okay. Now, in anything, would you like, if you aim to look up into a list, you need to iterate through this list. So for each, what's the types that we have inside this list? It's a student. For each student, as in my students list. Okay, if this student as dot ID is equal to the whatever the user give me. If they are equal together, return an S. Okay? Otherwise, return. Okay? Return null, which means I don't have anything. Okay? So I did have the functionality for search the list, add to the list, initialize the list, and returning my list. We could easily now, we don't need an object of this class since it's a static, which means I don't need to create an object. I don't need to have a couple of lists. I only need one list for my data. Now, since it's private, right, we change the list to private. Look, is inaccessible due to its protective level. For sure, we makes it private, which means I don't have access to this list anymore. But what I could do in terms of give me the ability to add for the student, I could easily call the method that we just created dot add student, and then we could then add this specific student, and this is the student data, have access to the list and add it to the list. If we need to search through this list, I will have access to my class, static class, then get student by ID, and then pass the ID. For example, let's pass 1. Okay? Let's test our application and show just the result inside a title.text. A title.text, it's an element. Title is an element inside my application, and then I will change their text to be equal to their return type S dot ID, for example. But since this is an integer and my text is a string, I need to convert it to a string. And then here, whenever I add a new student, maybe I could as well, I could just print their S1 for sure, dot ID inside the title. So as we said, always remember a data needed to be separate inside a different class, and we makes it a static class where I don't give the ability to create an object of this class, which means I will only have a one list that is controlled by this class, and everything inside this static class needed to be static as well. Okay, so add a student. I'm just adding a new student here, this one, and need student data I've added, and then show the student ID here, and then let's search. Let's print the name. It's better, I think, than the ID, so we will be having access. Since the name is string, you don't need anymore the toString. Okay. Now let's add a student, and then we've added student 1, we've added student 2. Let's search Dana. Okay, because I'm looking for the student that does have ID equal to 1. This is the wrap up for our second part of the static in C#. There are many things to be implemented here in our application. So stay tuned for part 3 in database, student database. Next time what we aim for is to give this data to like I will be asking the student, I will be asking the user to input this data for me, and then I will be using this data to add it or search or show the list of the students for my application. So stay tuned for part 3. Thanks for watching. See you later.